You're offering me what? Michael stared at the elegant woman standing in his rundown garage, her tailored suit worth more than his entire month's earnings. He glanced down at the job offer in his grease-stained hands, head of traditional craftsmanship at Volta Motors, with a salary that made his eyes water. Just yesterday he'd been fixing her broken-down van for free, not knowing she was Alexis Reid, CEO of the country's fastest-growing electric vehicle company. Now, she was offering him the chance to revolutionize his dying small-town garage into something extraordinary. "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her answer would change everything. "Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments." The first signs of dawn crept through the grimy windows of Hawkins Auto Repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Michael Hawkins wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his forearm, careful not to smear engine grease across his face, a lesson learned from decades of experience. At 4 to 5, his hands told the story of a life devoted to engines and machinery, calloused and marked with the small scars of countless repairs. The old garage had seen better days. Paint peeled from the walls in long curling strips, exposing the original color from when his father had first opened the place back in 1975. The sign outside flickered intermittently, the neon tubing on its last legs, much like the business itself. In a world increasingly dominated by computerized vehicles and dealership service centers, independent mechanics like Michael were becoming rare, relics of a bygone era. He glanced at the stack of bills on his cluttered desk. The red final notice stamps seemed to mock him in the dim light. 3 months behind on rent for the garage space, utilities threatening disconnection, and the parts suppliers were starting to demand payment up front. The small town of Cedar Springs had been hit hard when the manufacturing plant closed 2 years ago, taking with it nearly a third of the local jobs. People weren't fixing their cars anymore, they were just trying to keep their homes. Another thrilling Friday night, eh? Michael mumbled to himself as he reached for the worn thermos of coffee. Cold, bitter, and made 12 hours ago, it matched his mood perfectly. He should have closed up shop hours ago. But the Johnsons' ancient Buick needed fixing, and they couldn't afford to be without transportation to their jobs in the neighboring county. He'd told them to pay when they could, knowing full well that might be never. The familiar ache in his lower back intensified as he straightened up. Too many years hunched over engines, too many nights sleeping on the cot in the back office when work ran late. The divorce 3 years ago had been amicable enough. Sarah had simply grown tired of competing with carburetors and transmissions for his attention. She'd taken the house in the settlement, leaving Michael with the struggling business and a rented room above Ted's diner that smelled perpetually of fried onions. The sudden crunch of tires on gravel outside pulled Michael from his thoughts. Headlights swept across the interior of the garage, illuminating the organized chaos of tools and parts. Strange, he thought. He wasn't expecting anyone this late. The "open" sign had been turned off hours ago. Wiping his hands on a rag that had long ago lost its original color, Michael stepped toward the large bay doors. Through the dusty windows he could make out a sleek, charcoal gray van that had seen better days. Normally, he'd appreciate the irony of an expensive vehicle broken down outside his humble shop, but tonight he just felt tired. Still, turning away a customer wasn't something his father had ever taught him to do. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out, her silhouette backlit by the headlights. As she approached, Michael could see she was in her late 30s or early 40s, dressed in what appeared to be an expensive suit beneath an open trench coat. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and despite the late hour and obvious car trouble, she carried herself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to being in control. "I'm sorry," she called out as she approached. "I know you're closed, but I've got a situation here." Michael pushed open the smaller side door. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" "The van just died on me about a mile back. I managed to get it started again, but it's making some awful noises. I've got an important meeting in Greenfield tomorrow morning that I absolutely cannot miss." Her voice was direct, but not unkind, tinged with the slight urgency of someone whose carefully organized schedule was threatening to unravel. "Greenfield's still a good 2 hours from here," Michael noted, glancing at his watch. It was nearly midnight. I know, she sighed, running a hand over her face in a rare display of vulnerability. I was planning to drive through the night. Look, I understand if you can't help. I can call a tow service, find a motel, and deal with this tomorrow, but let me take a look, Michael interrupted, already moving toward Dow. The van. It wasn't in his nature to turn away someone in need, no matter how tired he was. Pull it into the bay if you can start it. Relief washed over her features. Thank you, really. As the woman maneuvered the van into the garage, Michael noticed the vehicle wasn't as new as he'd initially thought. It was a Mercedes-Benz Sprinter, probably 5 or 6 years old, customized with what looked like high-end camping equipment. Not the typical vehicle he saw in Cedar Springs. The engine made a distinctive knocking sound as she cut the ignition, and Michael's practiced ear immediately began running through potential causes. He grabbed a flashlight from his workbench and popped the hood. I'm Michael, by the way, Michael Hawkins. Alexis, she replied simply, standing back to give him space. I appreciate this more than you know. For the next 20 minutes, Michael methodically checked the engine, occasionally asking Alexis to try starting it or describing any unusual behaviors she'd noticed before the breakdown. He worked with the focused precision of someone performing a well-rehearsed dance, his hands moving confidently from one component to the next. Well, looks like you've got a failing fuel pump, he finally announced, wiping his hands on his rag. And your timing belt's not looking too healthy either. I'm surprised you made it this far without more serious problems. Alexis frowned. Can it be fixed tonight? Michael hesitated. Under normal circumstances, he'd say no. Parts would need to be ordered, and the labor would take several hours. But something in the woman's expression, determination mixed with barely concealed desperation, made him reconsider. I might have a compatible fuel pump in the back, he said slowly. Can't promise it's the right model, but I could make it work temporarily. Enough to get you to Greenfield at least. The timing belt can hold out a bit longer if we're careful. How long would that take? A couple hours, give or take. He glanced at his watch again. You'd be back on the road by 3 a.m. at the latest. Alexis nodded decisively. Do it. As Michael gathered his tools and headed to the storage room to hunt for the fuel pump, he couldn't help but wonder about his late-night customer. Her clothes and vehicle suggested money, but she had none of the entitled attitude he'd come to expect from wealthy visitors passing through Cedar Springs. And there was something else, a focused intensity that reminded him of himself in younger days, when the garage was thriving and every repair felt like a puzzle worth solving. The storage room was a testament to Michael's inability to throw anything away. Shelves lined with salvaged parts from vehicles long since crushed into scrap metal. His father had started the tradition, insisting that every component had potential value. Today's junk is tomorrow's treasure, he'd say, with a wink. Right now, Michael was grateful for the habit, as he spotted a fuel pump that might just work with some modification. When he returned to the main garage, he found Alexis sitting on his worn office chair, scrolling through something on her phone with intense concentration. She looked up when he approached. Found one, he announced, holding up the part. It'll need some tweaking, but it should do the job. You're a lifesaver, she said, putting the phone away. Is there somewhere nearby I could grab a coffee while I wait? I've been driving since 9 this morning. Michael glanced at his thermos. Nothing open at this hour, I'm afraid. Cedar Springs rolls up the sidewalks pretty early, but I've got a coffee maker in the back office. It's not fancy, but it's hot. That sounds perfect. Way? Alexis stood, smoothing down her suit jacket. Mind if I make a fresh pot? You look like you could use some too. The casual observation caught Michael off guard. Most customers didn't notice or care about the mechanic's state of exhaustion. Help yourself, he said, nodding toward the office door. Supplies are in the cabinet above the sink. As the smell of fresh coffee gradually replaced the usual sense of oil and metal, Michael lost himself in the repair. This was where he felt most at home, hands deep in an engine, solving problems with tools and ingenuity rather than words. The fuel pump required more modification than he'd anticipated, but he'd faced bigger challenges. He was so absorbed in his work, but he barely noticed when Alexis placed a steaming mug near his toolbox. It was only after he'd successfully extracted the old pump that he remembered the coffee. To his surprise, it was still warm, and made exactly the way he preferred, strong and black. "Thank you," he said when Alexis returned from the office, now carrying a ceramic mug of her own. "How'd you know I take it black?" She smiled slightly. "Educated guess. You strike me as someone who doesn't have much patience for frills." Michael chuckled, the sound rusty from disuse. "Fair assessment." "So?" Alexis leaned against a nearby workbench, careful not to disturb his organized tools. "How long have you been running this place?" "Officially? About 15 years, since my dad retired. But I've been working here since I was tall enough to hold a wrench." He continued working as he spoke, his hands never stopping their methodical movements. "Dad started it in '75. Used to be the busiest garage in 3 counties. "And now?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the faded walls and outdated equipment. Michael's hands stilled momentarily. "Now, we get by." He didn't elaborate on just how precarious that getting by had become. Pride, perhaps, or simply the habit of keeping his struggles to himself. Alexis seemed to understand the unspoken words. She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "It's not easy, running an independent business these days, especially in small towns." "You sound like you have some experience with that," Michael observed, returning to his work. "I do," she replied simply, not elaborating further. For the next hour, they fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Alexis asked occasional questions about the repair process, showing genuine interest rather than just making conversation. Michael found himself explaining more than he usually would, impressed by her quick grasp of mechanical concepts. In turn, he learned that she was heading to Greenfield for a business meeting, that she'd been on the road for nearly 2 weeks, and that she preferred sleeping in her customized van to staying in hotels. "More control that way," she explained, when he expressed surprise at someone who could clearly afford luxury accommodations choosing to essentially camp. "I like knowing exactly where I'll be, and not having to deal with check-in times or other people's schedules." Michael could understand that sentiment. It was part of why he'd chosen to remain independent rather than join one of the franchise repair shops that had tried to recruit him over the years. Freedom to make his own decisions had always seemed worth the financial instability. As he worked on installing the modified fuel pump, the conversation lulled into comfortable silence. Alexis had pulled out a notebook and was writing something, occasionally pausing to stare thoughtfully at the garage around her. Michael wondered what she saw: the decay and obsolescence, or something else. "Almost done," he announced around 2:30 in the morning, closing the hood with a satisfying thunk. "Let's start her up and see how she sounds." Alexis put away her notebook and slid into the driver's seat. The engine cranked once, twice, then roared to life. The previous knocking sound had reduced to a much quieter tick. "That's not perfect," Michael admitted, listening critically. "But it'll get you to Greenfield. Just try not to push it above 70 and get it to a proper service center as soon as you can for that timing belt." Alexis revved the engine experimentally, then cut it off. "It sounds 100 times better. I don't know how to thank you." Michael wiped his hands and began calculating the bill in his head. Parts, labor at his after-hours rate would be steep, but fair. Before he could quote a price, Alexis spoke again. "What do I owe you?" She reached for her purse, a simple but clearly expensive leather bag. Michael hesitated, looking at her properly for the first time since she'd arrived. Behind the confident exterior, he could see the shadows of exhaustion around her eyes. Something about her reminded him of himself. The determination to keep moving forward despite obstacles, the weight of responsibilities not visible to others. "Nothing," he heard himself say, surprising them both. "Consider it a professional courtesy." Alexis stared at him. "That's ridiculous. You've been working for hours, used parts from your inventory. I insist on paying." Michael shook his head, already regretting his impulsive decision but unwilling to backtrack. "The part was salvaged, would have sat on that shelf for another decade otherwise. And I was here anyway, catching up on paperwork." The lie came easily, though the stack of unaddressed bills on his desk told a different story. "At least let me pay for the labor," she pressed, already pulling out her wallet. "Tell you what," Michael said, an idea forming. "If you really want to repay me, Remember Hawkins Auto Repair next time you're passing through Cedar Springs. Word of mouth is the best advertising a small business can get. Alexis studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher a particularly complex equation. Finally, she nodded. "I'll do better than that," she promised, though she didn't explain how. As she prepared to leave, she surprised him by extending her hand. "Thank you, Michael. People like you are rare these days." His palm against hers was a study in contrasts, his calloused and oil-stained, hers smooth, but with an unexpected firmness to her grip. "Safe travels," he replied, oddly reluctant to see her go. It had been the most interesting midnight repair job he'd had in years. The van's taillights disappeared down the dark road, and Michael was left alone in the quiet garage once more. He cleaned his tools methodically, mind already shifting back to the Johnson's Buick and tomorrow's scheduled oil changes. By the time he locked up and climbed the stairs to his rented room above the diner, the strange encounter with Alexis had begun to take on a dreamlike quality. Just another story to file away. One of the thousands collected over a lifetime of fixing other people's vehicles. As he fell into an exhausted sleep, Michael had no way of knowing that the midnight repair would prove to be far more than an interesting anecdote. In less than 24 hours, everything would change. Alexis Reid navigated the dark highway with one hand on the steering wheel, the other holding her phone as she dictated notes into a voice recorder app. The van's engine hummed steadily beneath her, the earlier alarming knocks replaced with the minor tick the mechanic had warned her about. Preliminary assessment of Cedar Springs. Population approximately 5,000. Significant economic downturn, evident following manufacturing plant closure. Infrastructure, aging but functional. Local businesses, struggling, but community appears tight-knit, based on limited observation. She paused, considering her next words carefully. In 15 years as CEO of Volta Motors, she had developed a reputation for thorough, almost obsessive research before making any major business decision. This current project was perhaps her most ambitious yet, and the most personal. Subject: garage. Hawkins Auto Repair. Owner/operator Michael Hawkins, estimated mid-40s. Second-generation mechanic. Facility in poor repair but fundamentally sound. Equipment outdated but well-maintained. Owner demonstrates exceptional technical knowledge and problem-solving capabilities. No indication of computerized diagnostic tools or experience with electric vehicle systems. End quote. The highway stretched empty before her, the dashboard clock reading 3:17 a.m. She should be exhausted after nearly 17 hours on the road, but adrenaline kept her alert. The board meeting tomorrow? No. Today, she corrected herself, would determine whether her vision became reality or remained just another ambitious proposal. Most notable observation, she continued, her voice softening slightly. Subject performed complex repair using salvaged parts and refused payment despite obvious financial difficulties. Facility shows multiple signs of economic distress. Past due notices visible on desk, outdated advertising materials, minimal inventory, yet owner prioritized service over profit. End quote. That had been the moment that solidified her interest. She'd orchestrated the breakdown, of course. The fuel pump in her specially modified van had been deliberately tampered with before she'd entered Cedar Springs, the fifth small town she'd broken down in during the past 2 weeks. None of the previous mechanics had impressed her the way Michael Hawkins had. Subject meets primary criteria for Phase 1 implementation, she concluded. Recommendation: proceed with preliminary offer pending board approval. Alexis ended the recording and set the phone in its holder on the dashboard. The original plan had been to continue to Greenfield immediately after evaluating Cedar Springs, but her encounter with Michael had lasted longer than anticipated. With just 3 hours until her meeting, she decided to pull into the next rest area and catch a short nap. As she reclined the driver's seat and set an alarm, Alexis found herself thinking about Michael's hands, competent, steady, honest hands that told the story of a life dedicated to quality workmanship. Hands like her grandfather's, who had taught her everything she knew about engines long before she'd earned her MBA or founded Volta Motors. "You're getting sentimental," she chided herself, closing her eyes. This is business, not a charity project. But as sleep claimed her, Alexis couldn't help but wonder if perhaps it could be both. The Greenfield Grand Hotel's conference room buzzed with subdued conversation as Volta Motors board members arranged themselves around the polished mahogany table. At precisely 7 a.m., the double doors opened, and Alexis strode in, her appearance betraying none of her sleep-deprived state. Her charcoal suit was crisp, her presentation materials neatly arranged in a leather portfolio, her expression composed and confident. "Good morning," she greeted, taking her position at the head of the table. "Thank you all for accommodating this early meeting. I believe what I'm about to present justifies the unusual hour." Harrison Wells, the oldest board member and one of Volta's original investors, raised an eyebrow. "It must be something extraordinary to have you personally conducting field research for the past 2 weeks, Alexis. The suspense has been quite something." Alexis allowed herself a small smile. "I hope you'll find it worth the wait, Harrison." She opened her laptop, and the large screen at the front of the room illuminated with the Volta Motors logo, followed by the project title, Revival Initiative, Bridging Traditional Automotive Excellence with CRA. Electric Vehicle Innovation. For the next 30 minutes, Alexis outlined her vision with the precision and passion that had made her one of the most respected CEOs in the electric vehicle industry. Volta Motors had achieved remarkable success in the luxury EV market, but she argued that they were missing a crucial demographic: traditional automotive enthusiasts and rural communities skeptical of GRA. Electric technology. Our market research consistently shows that one of the biggest barriers to EV adoption isn't price or range anxiety, but trust, she explained, flipping to a slide showing survey results. Particularly in small towns and rural areas, people trust their local mechanics, many of whom have been servicing their vehicles for generations. These same mechanics are largely untrained in EV technology and often actively discouraged by manufacturers from attempting repairs. James Chen, the company's CFO, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting we try to convert these old-school mechanics? Because we've tried outreach programs before, with minimal success." "Not convert," Alexis corrected. "Partner. What I'm proposing is a network of Volta-certified independent repair shops across the country, focusing initially on economically distressed small towns. We provide training, equipment, and certification. They provide the established community trust and mechanical expertise that we, frankly, cannot replicate." She clicked to the next slide, showing a mock-up of a traditional garage transformed with subtle Volta branding. The Revival Initiative would have 3 phases. Phase 1. Identify and recruit exceptional traditional mechanics with the right mindset for adaptation. Phase 2. Provide comprehensive training and facility upgrades. Phase 3. Establish these locations as official Volta service centers while maintaining their independent status and traditional repair capabilities. The investment required would be substantial, noted Lakshmi Patel, head of strategic development. "Have you run the numbers?" "Extensively," Alexis confirmed, signaling James to distribute the financial projections. "The initial outlay is significant, but the long-term benefits extend beyond direct revenue. We're talking about community goodwill, expanded market penetration in previously resistant demographics, and a revolutionary approach to the increasingly problematic issue of right to repair." End quote. For the next hour, the board debated the proposal, raising concerns and suggesting modifications. Alexis fielded each question with well-researched responses, occasionally referring to notes from her visits to potential pilot locations. Finally, Harrison Wells, who had remained largely silent during the discussion, spoke up. "You've clearly done your homework, Alexis, but I sense there's something more to this than business strategy. This isn't like your usual proposals." Alexis met the older man's gaze steadily. Harrison had been her mentor from the beginning, one of the few who had believed in her vision when Volta was nothing more than an ambitious business plan drafted by a young woman with more ideas than connections. "You're right," she admitted. "This is personal for me. My grandfather was an independent mechanic in a town not unlike the ones I've been visiting. He taught me everything about engines before I could even drive. When he died, his shop died with him because there was no place for his kind of craftsmanship in the modern automotive industry. The Revival Initiative isn't just good business, though. I firmly believe it is. It's about preserving something valuable that we're in danger of losing." End quote. Harrison nodded slowly. "And you've found your first candidate for this program, I assume?" "I have," Alexis confirmed, bringing up a new slide showing exterior and interior photos of Hawkins Auto Repair that she'd discreetly taken during her visit. Michael Hawkins in Cedar Springs, second-generation mechanic, exceptional problem-solving skills. Currently facing severe economic pressure as his town struggles after a manufacturing plant closure. His garage has less than 3 months before likely closure, based on the past due notices I observed. Lakshmi studied the images. "And you believe he'd be receptive to this partnership? Traditional mechanics aren't exactly known for embracing electric vehicles." "I've spent enough time with him to make an initial assessment," Alexis replied. "He's pragmatic, adaptive, and puts quality service above all else. He's exactly the kind of person we need for the pilot program." After another 30 minutes of discussion, the board voted. The Revival Initiative was approved with the condition that the pilot program with Hawkins Auto Repair would serve as a proof of concept before expanding further. As the meeting adjourned, Harrison held back, waiting until they were alone in the conference room. "I haven't seen you this energized about a project in years," he observed. "This mechanic must be quite something." Alexis began gathering her materials, avoiding Harrison's knowing gaze. "He's the right candidate for the program, that's all." Harrison hummed non-committally. "Just remember, Alexis, people aren't as predictable as business plans. This Michael Hawkins might not see your offer as the opportunity you do." "I'm aware of that possibility," she acknowledged, snapping her portfolio closed. "But I think he will. He just doesn't know it yet." 3 days after the midnight repair, Michael was elbow-deep in Mrs. Gunderson's ancient Oldsmobile when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Glancing up, he was surprised to see the now-familiar gray Mercedes van pulling into the lot. His surprise doubled when not one but 3 vehicles followed it. A sleek black Tesla, a luxury SUV, and what appeared to be a customized delivery truck with a logo he didn't recognize. Wiping his hands, Michael stepped out of the bay, curiosity overriding his usual reserve. Alexis emerged from the van, looking markedly different from their first meeting. Or before, she had seemed like a road-weary business traveler. Now she radiated a composed authority. Her suit was impeccable, her posture commanding, and the confident smile she offered suggested someone accustomed to being in charge. "Michael," she greeted warmly. "I hope you don't mind the unexpected visit. I promised I'd do better than word-of-mouth advertising, remember?" Before he could respond, the doors of the other vehicles opened, and 6 people emerged, each carrying tablet computers or specialized equipment he didn't recognize. They nodded respectfully to Alexis before spreading out around the exterior of the garage, taking measurements and photographs. Michael stared, baffled. "What's going on? Who are these people?" Alexis gestured toward the office. "Perhaps we could talk inside? I have a proposal that I think will interest you." Still confused, but increasingly curious, Michael led the way, acutely aware of the shabby state of his office compared to whatever world Alexis clearly inhabited. He hastily cleared a stack of invoices from the visitor's chair, noticing with embarrassment that the coffee cups from their late-night conversation 3 days ago were still sitting unwashed on his desk. "Sorry about the mess," he mumbled. "Wasn't expecting company." "No apologies necessary," Alexis replied, seeming genuinely unconcerned as she took the offered seat. "Actually, the state of your garage is partly why I'm here." Michael stiffened. "Look, if this is some kind of inspection or shutdown notice, quite the opposite," Alexis interrupted smoothly. She reached into her bag and retrieved a business card, offering it to him. "I should have properly introduced myself the other night. Alexis Reid, CEO of Volta Motors." Michael accepted the card automatically, the embossed logo and title registering slowly through his confusion. Volta Motors, one of the leading electric vehicle manufacturers in the country. He'd read about them in automotive magazines, seen their sleek cars occasionally passing through town, always driven by someone who looked like they belonged in a different world than his. "You're—" He trailed off, looking from the card to her face, searching for the deception. "That was some kind of test the other night? The breakdown?" Alexis had the grace to look slightly abashed. A controlled evaluation, yes. The fuel pump was deliberately compromised, though the timing belt genuinely needed replacement. I'd been visiting small-town garages across 5 states, looking for the right partner for a new initiative. The admission should have angered him, but Michael was too confused to feel much beyond bewilderment. Partner? For what? For this, Alexis said, producing a tablet from her bag. She tapped the screen, then turned it toward him. The Revival Initiative. For the next 20 minutes, Michael listened in stunned silence as Alexis outlined her proposal. Volta Motors wanted to establish a network of independent garages certified to work on their electric vehicles while maintaining traditional repair services. Hawkins Auto Repair would serve as the pilot location, receiving comprehensive upgrades, specialized training, and official certification. We'd update your equipment, renovate the facility, and provide extensive training for you and any staff you'd need to hire, Alexis explained, scrolling through images of sleek diagnostic tools and modernized workspaces. In return, you'd become our first certified independent repair center, serving as both a traditional garage and a Volta service location. Michael's mind raced, trying to process the implications. Why me? Why Cedar Springs? We're hardly a hotbed for luxury electric vehicles. That's precisely the point, Alexis replied. The future of transportation is electric, but we're failing to reach communities like Cedar Springs because we're not speaking their language or respecting their traditions. You represent the bridge between world's exceptional traditional craftsmanship with the potential to adapt to new technologies, end quote. And the fact that I'm nearly bankrupt has nothing to do with it? Michael asked bluntly. I'm a convenient charity case for your corporate social responsibility program? Alexis's expression hardened slightly. I don't do charity, Mr. Hawkins. I make strategic investments. Yes, your financial situation makes you more receptive to change than some established shops might be. But that's only one factor. What impressed me was your ingenuity, your problem-solving approach, and most importantly, your integrity. My integrity? You fixed my vehicle in the middle of the night and refused payment, she said simply. You put service above profit. That's the kind of value that can't be taught in any training program, and it's exactly what this initiative needs to succeed. Michael stood abruptly, needing physical movement to process the overwhelming information. He walked to the window, watching as Alexis's team continued their assessment of his property. One woman was taking soil samples from the back lot, while 2 men discussed something while pointing at the roof. This is crazy, he muttered, more to himself than to Alexis. You want to turn my failing garage into some kind of high-tech EV repair shop? I've never even worked on an electric car. Not turn it into something else, Alexis corrected, joining him at the window. Evolve it into something more. The traditional repair services would continue. That's crucial to the concept. We're not replacing your skills, we're expanding them. Adding to your capabilities, not diminishing them. Michael turned to face her. And what happens when Volta Motors decides this experiment isn't profitable enough? When the next quarterly report needs trimming and the small-town initiative gets cut? I've seen how corporations work, Ms. Reid. You're all enthusiasm at the beginning, but 3 years, she interrupted. Minimum guaranteed contract, with substantial penalties for early termination on our part. The full renovation and training costs covered regardless of outcomes, and a revenue-sharing model that ensures you're incentivized for success, but protected from initial slow adoption. She held his gaze steadily. I've been working on this concept for 5 years, Mr. Hawkins. It's not a quarterly whim or a PR stunt. It's the future I believe in. One where progress doesn't have to come at the expense of tradition and community. Michael glanced back at his cluttered desk, the stack of unpaid bills, the faded photograph of his father standing proudly in front of the newly opened garage decades ago. Then he looked out again at the team already planning the transformation of his failing business. I'd need to see everything in writing, he said finally. Have my lawyer look it over. Alexis smiled, producing a thick folder from her bag. I expected nothing less. Full contract, financial projections, timeline, training curriculum, it's all here. Take as much time as you need to review it. We'll continue the preliminary assessment today, but nothing proceeds without your formal agreement." End quote. As she handed him the folder, their fingers brushed briefly. "This isn't charity, Michael," she said quietly. "It's recognition of value. Your skills, your approach, your connection to this community, they're worth preserving. I'm just offering the means to do so in a changing world." Michael accepted the folder, its weight substantial in his hands. "I'll think about it," he promised, which was more than he'd expected to offer when the strange procession of vehicles had first arrived. "That's all I ask," Alexis replied. She checked her watch, a simple but clearly expensive timepiece. "My team will finish their initial assessment by this afternoon. I've taken a room at the Cedar Inn for the next few days, if you have questions after reviewing the materials. My direct number is on the first page." As she turned to leave, Michael found himself asking the question that had been bothering him since her revelation. The van breaking down. Was any of that real? Or was it all some elaborate test? Alexis paused at the door. "The breakdown was orchestrated, yes. But my reactions weren't." She smiled slightly. "I really do prefer sleeping in my van to hotels. More control." After she left to rejoin her team, Michael sat heavily in his chair, the contract folder unopened before him. The whole situation felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than his actual life. Alexis Reid, CEO of Volta Motors, had specifically sought him out, had seen something worthwhile in his struggling garage when he himself had begun to doubt its value. He finally opened the folder, the legal language swimming before his eyes as he tried to focus. The financial figures, however, were impossible to misinterpret. The investment Volta proposed was substantial enough to not just save his business, but transform it into something he'd never imagined possible. The question was whether he wanted that transformation, and whether he could trust the woman offering it. Cedar Springs had exactly one motel, a relic of the 1960s that had been modernized just enough to justify its continued existence. The Cedar Inn featured wood-paneled walls, a vending machine that offered only 3 choices, and beds that had seen better decades. For Alexis, who typically stayed in luxury accommodations when not sleeping in her customized van, it represented a crash course in the realities of small-town America. She sat cross-legged on the surprisingly comfortable bed, her laptop balanced on her knees as she video-conferenced with her executive team back at Volta headquarters in California. The preliminary assessment reports from Cedar Springs scrolled on a second screen beside her. "The property evaluation is promising," Lakshmi reported, her image crisp despite the motel's questionable Wi-Fi. "The building is structurally sound despite its appearance. The electrical system will need a complete overhaul to accommodate the charging stations and diagnostic equipment, but the location is actually ideal, close to the highway, but firmly embedded in the community." Alexis nodded, making notes. "And environmental?" "All clear," replied the sustainability director. "No contamination issues that would complicate renovation. The current waste management practices are outdated but fixable." "What about the financial breakdown?" Alexis asked, turning her attention to James. The CFO adjusted his glasses. "If we proceed with the full proposal, we're looking at approximately $850,000 for the initial transformation, plus ongoing support costs. It's at the upper end of our projected range for the pilot location, but still within budget." Alexis wasn't surprised. She'd anticipated that Hawkins Auto Repair would require significant investment after her initial visit. And the timeline? 4 months from agreement to official opening, assuming no major complications, the project manager reported. Phase 1 renovations could be completed in 8 weeks, allowing for partial operations while the more advanced systems are installed. Harrison Wells, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "And what about the mechanic himself? Any read on whether he's likely to accept our offer?" Alexis hesitated. Cautious interest. "He's having his lawyer review the contract, which is a good sign. It means he's taking it seriously rather than dismissing it outright." "And if he declines?" Lakshmi asked the question everyone was thinking. "Then we move to our second choice location," Alexis replied evenly, though the thought was more disappointing than she cared to admit. "But I don't think he will. Michael Hawkins is a pragmatist at heart. He'll recognize the opportunity for what it is." Harrison's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Just remember what we discussed, Alexis. Don't take it personally if this doesn't work out. The initiative is bigger than any one location. I'm aware of that, she responded, perhaps too quickly. We'll reconvene tomorrow after I've had a chance to follow up with him. After ending the call, Alexis closed her laptop and stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of travel and meetings. The motel room was sparse but clean. With a view of Cedar Springs Main Street, a collection of storefronts that had likely looked much the same for the past 30 years. She could see the diner where Michael rented a room, the hardware store, the small library, the shuttered manufacturing plant looming in the distance like a fallen giant. She found herself wondering what Michael was doing now. Reviewing the contract with suspicion? Discussing it with trusted friends? Or perhaps doing what she would do methodically, weighing the pros and cons, analyzing the risk versus potential reward. Her phone chimed with a text message. Dinner? I have questions. Michael. Alexis smiled slightly at the directness. No social niceties or corporate language, just straightforward communication. It was refreshing after years of navigating the careful verbal chess matches of Kane. Corporate leadership. Ted's diner in 30 minutes? She replied. The response came quickly. See you there. Ted's diner occupied the corner of Main and Elm, its neon sign casting a red glow over the nearly empty parking lot. At 7:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. The dinner rush, such as it was in Cedar Springs, had already come and gone. Michael sat in a booth by the window, the contract folder open on the table before him, a mug of coffee cooling at his elbow. He'd spent the afternoon alternating between his regular repair work and poring over Volta's proposal, trying to make sense of the opportunity that had literally driven into his beret. Garage. Frank Wilson, a semi-retired lawyer who handled what little legal work Michael needed in exchange for free oil changes, had reviewed the contract and pronounced it surprisingly fair, considering it's coming from a corporation. They're serious about this, Frank had said, tapping the thick document. These penalty clauses for early termination? They're protecting you, not them. And the revenue-sharing model is more generous than anything I've seen in 30 years of practice. Still, Michael couldn't quite shake his wariness. 15 years, running a struggling business, had taught him that opportunities that seemed too good to be true usually were. And yet, the prospect of watching his father's legacy crumble under mounting debts was equally unpalatable. The bell above the diner's door jingled, pulling Michael from his thoughts. Alexis entered, having exchanged her business suit for jeans and a simple button-down shirt, though her authoritative presence remained unchanged. Heads turned as she crossed to his booth. Cedar Springs didn't get many visitors, especially not ones who carried themselves with such quiet confidence. Thanks for meeting me, Michael said, as she slid into the seat across from him. Thank you for the invitation, Alexis replied. She glanced at the contract. I take it you've had time to review our proposal? Michael nodded. My lawyer says I'd be crazy not to accept. But you're still hesitant, she observed. It wasn't a question. Before he could respond, a waitress approached Janet, who had worked at Ted since Michael was a teenager. The usual, Mike? She asked, already pouring coffee into a fresh mug. Thanks, Janet. She turned to Alexis with undisguised curiosity. And for you, hun? I'll have the same, Alexis replied, earning an approving nod from Janet before she retreated to the kitchen. Michael raised an eyebrow. You don't, even know what the usual is. Alexis smiled slightly. I'm adaptable. Besides, local recommendations are usually the safest bet in a new place. It's just a burger and fries, Michael admitted. Nothing fancy. Sometimes the simplest things are the best, she replied, then gestured toward the contract. Your concerns, Michael. I'd rather hear them directly than make assumptions. Michael considered his words carefully. Why does Volta Motors really want to partner with failing garages in dying towns? The financials make it clear this isn't a profit-driven decision, at least not in the short term. Alexis nodded, accepting the directness of the question. You're right. The immediate financial return doesn't justify the investment. But business is about more than quarterly profits, despite what Wall Street might think. She leaned forward slightly. Electric vehicles are the future, That's undeniable. But the transition has created a divide. Urban centers are adapting quickly, while rural communities are being left behind. That divide isn't just economically inefficient, it's socially destructive. So, this is about market expansion, Michael concluded. Partially, Alexis acknowledged, but it's also about sustainability, and I don't just mean environmental. The skills and knowledge, embodied in places like your garage, are valuable. They represent generations of expertise that shouldn't be lost simply because technology is evolving. She paused as Janet returned with their food-identical plates featuring burgers nearly the size of the plate itself. My grandfather was a mechanic, Alexis continued after Janet departed. He ran a shop much like yours in a small town in Michigan. When he died, there was no one to take over. The building was eventually demolished for a strip mall. She took a bite of her burger, chewed thoughtfully. This is excellent, by the way. Ted makes them from scratch. Michael replied automatically, his mind still processing her revelation. Your grandfather taught you about cars? Alexis nodded. Everything I know about engines I learned from him, long before business school or engineering classes. He used to say that understanding how things work is the first step to improving them. Something in her expression, a brief flash of vulnerability, made Michael reassess his assumptions about the polished CEO sitting across from him. The Revival Initiative isn't just a business strategy, Alexis continued. It's a recognition that progress doesn't have to come at the expense of tradition. We can bridge these worlds, the craftsmanship of traditional auto repair, with the innovation of electric vehicles. Michael took a long sip of his coffee, buying time to gather his thoughts. And if I say yes? What exactly happens next? Alexis's expression brightened subtly. She recognized the shift in his tone from if to what next as the significant step it was. We would begin with minimal disruption to your current operations, she explained. The first phase focuses on facility upgrades that benefit both traditional and EV repair, new lifts, better lighting, updated office systems. You'd continue serving your existing customers while beginning specialized training, both online and with in-person instructors. She pulled out her phone, swiping to a calendar. The second phase introduces EV-specific equipment and more intensive training, including a 2-week session at our technical center in California. By month 4, we'd be ready for the official certification and launch. Michael tried to envision his shabby garage transformed into the sleek facility depicted in Volta's materials. It was hard to reconcile the two images, yet Alexis spoke with such certainty that he could almost see it taking shape. And my existing customers? The people who rely on me to keep their 20-year-old trucks running because they can't afford anything newer? Remain your priority, Alexis assured him. That's fundamental to the concept. Your traditional services continue uninterrupted. In fact, they improve with better equipment and the ability to hire additional staff. The EV services gradually integrate as demand grows. They continued discussing details as they ate, Alexis answering each question with a thoroughness that suggested she'd anticipated his concerns. By the time they'd finished their meal, Michael found his skepticism gradually giving way to cautious optimism. There's one more thing I'd like to show you, Alexis said as Janet cleared their plates. Are you free tomorrow morning? Say, 8 o'clock? I have a timing belt replacement scheduled, but I could push it to the afternoon. Michael replied, curiosity piqued. Perfect. I'll pick you up at the garage. She reached for the check, but Michael was faster. This one's on me, he insisted. Call it local hospitality. Alexis accepted with a gracious nod. Until tomorrow then. As she left the diner, Michael remained seated, staring thoughtfully at the contract folder. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to consider a future beyond mere survival for Hawkins Auto Repair. The possibility was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. When Alexis arrived at the garage the next morning, she wasn't driving the Mercedes van, but the sleek black Tesla that had been part of the previous day's procession. Michael, who had been waiting outside, raised an eyebrow at the vehicle. Not very subtle, he commented as she pulled to a stop. Alexis smiled. Today isn't about subtlety. Hop in. The interior of the Tesla was unlike any vehicle Michael had experienced. Despite his lifetime around automobiles, the minimalist dashboard featured a single large touchscreen. The seats were buttery leather, and the cabin was eerily quiet when Alexis pressed the start button. "Where are we going?" he asked as they pulled onto the main road. "About 40 miles north," Alexis replied. "I want you to meet someone." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, Michael alternating between studying the Tesla's innovative design features and watching the familiar landscape of his region scroll past. Occasionally, Alexis would point out a particular feature of the vehicle, explaining its function with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely passionate about the technology, rather than simply trying to make a sales pitch. Eventually, they turned onto a rural highway, passing through areas even more sparsely populated than Cedar Springs. After nearly an hour, they approached a small town that looked startlingly similar to Michael's home. The same mix of faded storefronts, the same evidence of economic struggle. "Welcome to Riverdale," Alexis announced as they drove down the main street. "Population 200. Their manufacturing plant closed in 2018, 2 years before yours." Michael glanced at her. "Why are we here?" "You'll see." She navigated to the edge of town, finally pulling into the parking lot of what appeared to be a recently renovated building. The sign read, "Harper's Automotive," with a smaller tagline beneath, "Traditional Boss. Craftsmanship, Future Technology." A middle-aged woman emerged from the front office as they parked, wiping her hands on a shop rag in a gesture so familiar that Michael immediately recognized a fellow mechanic. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her coveralls bore the same logo as the S building. "Alexis," she called, breaking into a warm smile. "Right on time, as usual." "Rachel," Alexis greeted her with genuine affection. "Thank you for accommodating us on short notice. This is Michael Hawkins, from Cedar Springs." Rachel Harper extended her hand, her grip firm and confident. "The potential new member of the family. Alexis has mentioned you." "Family?" Michael echoed, shaking her hand automatically. Rachel grinned. "That's what it feels like after working with Volta for the past year. Come on in, I'll give you the tour." The interior of Harper's Automotive was nothing short of transformative. One side featured traditional repair bays, with state-of-the-art equipment, hydraulic lifts, diagnostic computers, and organized tool stations. The other side housed specialized areas, clearly designed for electric vehicles, including charging ports and what looked like a small classroom setup. "We were the second pilot location," Rachel explained as she led them through the facility. "First one was out west. I was skeptical as hell when Alexis first showed up, thought it was some corporate takeover attempt dressed up as a partnership." "What changed your mind?" Michael asked, taking in the immaculate workspace. Rachel exchanged a look with Alexis. "She didn't try to change who we are. That was key. Harper's has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather started it, my father expanded it, and I was watching it die, inch by inch, until Volta came along." She gestured around the garage. "Now we're servicing both the trucks that have been coming here for decades and the new EVs passing through on the interstate. Hired 3 new people, including my nephew who's apprenticing. Business is up nearly 70% from our lowest point." Michael wandered toward one of the workstations, examining the tools, a blend of traditional implements and specialized equipment he didn't recognize. The learning curve for the EV technology. "Was it difficult?" "Challenging, but not impossible," Rachel replied honestly. "The training program is comprehensive, and they don't throw you into the deep end. Without preparation, I started with basic maintenance and worked up to more complex systems. Now I'm teaching other shops in the region." They continued the tour, Rachel detailing the transition process, the challenges they'd faced, and the unexpected benefits. Throughout, Michael noted the pride in her voice, the confident way she moved through the space, not like someone working in a corporate subsidiary, but like an owner who had successfully adapted to changing times. In the small staff lounge, Rachel poured coffee while Alexis excused herself to take a phone call. Once they were alone, Michael asked the question that had been foremost in his mind. "Off the record, are there strings attached that don't show up in the contract? Corporate oversight? Pressure to phase out traditional repairs?" Rachel considered him thoughtfully. "The only pressure has been to maintain our standards across both domains. Alexis is intense about quality. She expects excellence, but she also provides the resources to achieve it. She leaned forward slightly. Here's what the contract doesn't capture. They actually care about places like Riverdale and Cedar Springs. The program isn't just about expanding Volta's service network. It's about keeping communities like ours viable in a changing economy. Michael nodded slowly, processing her words. And working directly with her? He asked, gesturing toward the door where Alexis had disappeared. A knowing smile crossed Rachel's face, challenging, inspiring, occasionally terrifying. She has the highest standards I've ever encountered, but she applies them to herself first. And she remembers every detail asked about my daughter's college applications the other day, something I'd mentioned once in passing months ago. When Alexis rejoined them, they completed the tour with a visit to the customer waiting area, a comfortable space featuring educational displays about both traditional engines and electric vehicle systems. We're trying to make the transition less mysterious, Rachel explained. Many of our customers have never even been in an EV before. This helps demystify the technology. As they prepared to leave, Rachel pulled Michael aside briefly. For what it's worth, I was where you are now, full of doubts, worried about losing the shop's identity. A year later, I can honestly say it was the best decision I could have made. Not just for the business, but for Riverdale itself. The drive back to Cedar Springs was quieter than the journey out, Michael deep in thought as he processed everything he'd seen. Alexis gave him the space to reflect, keeping her attention on the road. Finally, as they neared the town limits, Michael broke the silence. Harper's doesn't feel like a corporate franchise. That's intentional, Alexis replied. Each location maintains its unique character and community connections. We provide the framework and resources, you provide the heart and expertise. And a year from now, when the novelty has worn off, when the next big initiative comes along and this one gets less attention? Alexis signaled for a turn, her expression serious. The Revival Initiative isn't a short-term project, Michael. It's central to our long-term strategy. But even if priorities shifted, the contract protects you. The facility improvements, the training, equipment, those become yours regardless. She pulled into the garage parking lot and turned to face him fully. I understand your hesitation. Trust takes time to build, especially between worlds as different as yours and mine seem on the surface. But I believe we can create something remarkable here, something that honors the past, while embracing the future. Tay. Michael studied her for a long moment. Rachel called it a family. That's how we see it, Alexis confirmed. A network of independent businesses united by shared values and mutual support. As they sat in the quiet interior of the Tesla, Michael made his decision. Not impulsively, but with the careful consideration he applied to all important choices. Okay, he said simply. Let's do it. Alexis's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way her professional expressions often didn't. You won't regret this, Michael. I better not, he replied, but there was no edge to his tone. For the first time in years, he felt something that had become almost foreign: optimism about the future of Hawkins Auto Repair. The transformation began the following week, unfolding in carefully orchestrated phases that allowed the garage to continue serving its existing customers even as renovations progressed. The first changes were relatively minor: updated lighting, a modernized office system, improved ventilation. But as days turned into weeks, the evolution became more dramatic. New hydraulic lifts replaced the aging equipment that Michael had been nursing along for years. The electrical system was completely overhauled to accommodate the specialized charging stations and diagnostic tools needed for electric vehicles. The customer waiting area, once a single molded plastic chair and an ancient coffee machine, was reimagined as a comfortable space where clients could learn about both traditional and electric vehicle technologies. Throughout the process, Michael found himself increasingly impressed by Alexis's approach. Though she maintained overall oversight, visiting Cedar Springs at least once a week, she never micromanaged the details. Instead, she focused on ensuring that the renovation respected the garage's heritage while preparing it for a new chapter. We're not erasing history, she explained one afternoon as they reviewed plans for the exterior signage. We're building on it. The training component proved both more challenging and more fascinating than Michael had anticipated. Online courses in electric vehicle systems occupied his evenings, while visiting instructors provided hands-on training during scheduled periods when the garage was closed to customers. The learning curve was steep, but Michael found himself energized by the challenge in a way he hadn't experienced in years. As promised, after 2 months, he traveled to Volta's technical center in California for intensive training. The facility was impressive cutting-edge technology housed in a building designed for maximum efficiency and minimal environmental impact. Yet what struck Michael most was meeting the other mechanics in the program, each from small towns facing economic challenges similar to Cedar Springs. "We're something of a movement now," explained Carlos, a third-generation mechanic from New Mexico. 17 locations across 12 states, with more joining every few months. By the time Michael returned to Cedar Springs, the garage was nearly unrecognizable, yet somehow still fundamentally Hawkins Auto Repair. The original sign had been restored rather than replaced, now illuminated by energy-efficient lighting. His father's tools, previously stored in dusty boxes, had been cleaned and displayed prominently in the customer area, honoring the legacy that had started everything. Most significantly, Michael had hired 2 employees. Danny, a recent high school graduate with an intuitive understanding of technology, and Liz, a former plant worker with mechanical experience who was eager to learn new skills. Training them became an unexpected pleasure, Michael discovering that he enjoyed passing on both his traditional knowledge and the new techniques he'd acquired. 4 months after his late-night repair of Alexis's van, Michael stood in the center of the transformed garage, taking in the changes. The space was immaculate, every tool in its place, every system functioning at peak efficiency. Through the windows, he could see the newly installed Volta charging stations at the edge of the lot, the first in Cedar Springs, already attracting attention from curious locals. "What do you think your father would say?" Alexis asked quietly, coming to stand beside him. She had arrived that morning for the official certification ceremony scheduled for the following day, an event that had generated surprising excitement throughout Cedar Springs. Michael considered the question seriously. He'd be shocked at first. Dad was old school in a lot of ways, but ultimately, I think he'd approve. He always said a good mechanic adapts to the cars of their time. He gestured toward where Danny was carefully explaining regenerative braking to Mrs. Gunderson, who had become an unexpected ambassador for the garage's new direction. "And it's working. People are curious rather than suspicious. That's a start." "More than a start," Alexis corrected, handing him a tablet displaying the garage's financial projections. "You're ahead of schedule on every metric we established, and the community response has exceeded our expectations." The numbers were impressive, though Michael knew that the true test would come in the months ahead, as the initial novelty wore off. Still, for the first time in years, Hawkins Auto Repair wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Alexis continued, leading him toward the office, now a clean, organized space with modern equipment. "Phase 2 of the Revival Initiative involves expanding the network through regional hubs. We'd like Hawkins to serve as the first hub, providing support and basic training to other locations within a 100-mile radius." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You want me to teach other mechanics?" "You've taken to the EV systems more quickly than any of our other partners," Alexis replied. "And you have a natural ability to explain complex concepts in accessible terms. We're prepared to adjust your compensation accordingly, of course." She presented another contract, this one outlining the expanded role and the additional resources it would entail. The proposed salary made Michael blink twice to ensure he wasn't misreading the figure. "You don't need to decide immediately," Alexis assured him. "Review it with your lawyer, think it over." "I don't need time," Michael replied, surprising himself with his certainty. "I'll do it." Alexis smiled, an expression that had become increasingly genuine during their months of collaboration. "I had a feeling you might say that. We'll discuss the details after tomorrow's ceremony." As she turned to leave, Michael was struck by how dramatically his life had changed since their first meeting. From barely keeping the garage afloat, to planning for expansion. From working in isolation, to leading a team. From dreading the future, to embracing it all because Alexis Reid had recognized value where others, including himself, had seen only decline. "Why did you really choose me?" he asked suddenly. "Out of all the struggling garages in all the small towns you visited, why Hawkins Auto Repair?" Alexis paused at the door, considering her answer carefully. "When you fixed my van that night, you didn't see a customer or a potential profit. You saw a person who needed help, and you provided it without expectation of return. That kind of integrity is rare in any industry." She met his gaze directly. The Revival Initiative isn't just about combining traditional skills with new technology. It's about preserving a certain way of doing business, one based on trust, quality, and community. You embodied that from Bao. Our first interaction. Her words lingered in the air between them, carrying weight beyond their professional relationship. Before Michael could respond, his phone rang a customer with questions about the charging stations. By the time he finished the call, Alexis had left for a meeting with the mayor, who had become an enthusiastic supporter of the project after seeing its positive impact on local employment. The moment had passed, but Michael found himself replaying her words as he returned to preparing for the next day's ceremony. The official launch of Hawkins Auto Repair as a Volta-certified service center drew a larger crowd than anyone had anticipated. It seemed as if half of Cedar Springs had turned out for the event, along with representatives from neighboring communities and a surprising amount of media attention. The Revival Initiative had begun generating national interest as a model for rural economic development in the electric vehicle era. A small stage had been set up in the parking lot, flanked by both traditional vehicles and several Volta models brought in for the occasion. Michael, uncomfortably aware of being the center of attention in his new uniform, a design that incorporated elements of both Volta's sleek haze aesthetic and the traditional Hawkins logo, stood to one side as Mayor Wilson delivered an enthusiastic speech about progress and opportunity. From his position, Michael could see his new employees mingling with the crowd, proudly explaining features of the renovated facility. Mrs. Gunderson was holding court near the refreshment table, telling anyone who would listen how her mechanic was now at the forefront of automotive innovation. Even Ted from the diner had closed for the morning to attend, serving his famous coffee from a mobile cart. When it was Alexis's turn to speak, she approached the microphone with the polished confidence that came naturally to her. Yet there was genuine warmth in her voice as she addressed the gathering. "The Revival Initiative began with a simple question," she explained. "How do we honor tradition while embracing innovation? How do we ensure that the transition to electric vehicles strengthens rather than weakens the communities that have been the backbone of American automotive culture for generations?" She gestured toward the renovated garage. "What you see here today is our answer. Not a corporate takeover, but a true partnership. Not the replacement of traditional skills, but their evolution. Not the erasure of local identity, but its celebration." Michael listened with growing emotion as she outlined the journey that had brought them to this point, her words capturing perfectly the balance they had worked so hard to achieve. When she invited him to join her for the ceremonial ribbon cutting, the applause was both surprising and humbling. "I'm not much for speeches," he admitted when she handed him the microphone. "But I do want to thank everyone who supported Hawkins Auto Repair over the years, our loyal customers, our new team members, and the entire Cedar Springs community." He looked directly at Alexis. "And I want to thank Volta Motors for seeing potential here when others didn't, for understanding that progress doesn't have to come at the expense of tradition, and that small towns like ours still have plenty to offer in a changing world." As they cut the ribbon together, flashbulbs popping and applause rising around them, Michael was struck by the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a midnight repair job to a transformative partnership, from suspicion to trust, from struggling business owner to community leader. The formal ceremony gave way to an open house, with visitors exploring the renovated facility and test-driving Volta vehicles. Michael found himself moving from group to group, explaining the new services, while reassuring longtime customers that their traditional vehicles would continue receiving the same care they always had. It was late afternoon before he had a moment alone with Alexis, finding her examining the display of his father's tools with genuine interest. "These carbon steel wrenches," she commented as he approached. "My grandfather had a similar set. He used to say you could feel the difference in quality with your hands." "He was right," Michael replied. "There's a weight to them that the newer ones don't have." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the continuing celebration filtering in from outside. "I've been thinking about what you asked yesterday," Alexis said finally. "About why I chose you and this garage." Michael waited, sensing there was more to her answer than she had previously shared. "The truth is, I visited 17 garages across 5 states. Many of them had potential. Some were in worse financial shape than yours, which theoretically would have made them more receptive to partnership." She turned to face him directly. "But none of them had what I saw here that night. A perfect balance of technical skill and human compassion. You didn't just fix my van. You treated me with dignity when you thought I was just a stranded traveler with nothing to offer in return." There was something in her expression beyond professional appreciation or even friendship, a vulnerability that the polished CEO rarely revealed. "The Revival Initiative is my legacy at Volta," she continued. "The program I've fought for, funded, and championed against considerable skepticism. I needed the first full-scale pilot to be perfect, not just technically, but philosophically. When I left your garage that night, I knew I'd found it. And now? Now? Michael asked. "Have we lived up to your vision?" "Exceeded it," Alexis replied without hesitation. "The data is impressive, but it's the intangibles that matter most. The way the community has embraced the change, the enthusiasm of your new employees, your own transformation from skeptic to advocate." She gestured toward the crowded lot outside, where rural residents were examining electric vehicles with curious interest rather than suspicion. "This is exactly what I hoped to create, a bridge between worlds that previously seemed incompatible." "So what comes next?" Michael asked. "Beyond the regional hub expansion we discussed, that depends partly on you," Alexis replied. "The initiative is growing faster than even I anticipated. We're receiving inquiries from independent garages nationwide, and the economic development implications have attracted attention from policymakers." She hesitated, then added, "I'll be spending more time on the road in the coming months, identifying the next wave of partner locations. But Cedar Springs will remain our flagship, the model we point to when they'll." Explaining the concept. The prospect of seeing less of Alexis was unexpectedly disappointing. Over the past 4 months, their professional relationship had evolved into something deeper. Not romantic, exactly, but a connection based on mutual respect and shared vision that had become increasingly important to Barra. "Michael, you'll always have a midnight repair slot reserved," he said lightly, masking the more complex emotions beneath. Alexis smiled, understanding the sentiment behind the joke. "I'll hold you to that." Before either could say more, they were interrupted by Mayor Wilson, eager to introduce Alexis to representatives from a neighboring county interested in the initiative. With a regretful glance, she allowed herself to be led away, immediately resuming her polished CEO persona. As the celebration continued around him, Michael returned to his duties as host, but his mind kept returning to their conversation. The success of the renovated garage was undeniable, the future brighter than he could have imagined just months ago. Yet he found himself wondering what that future might hold beyond professional achievement, and whether Alexis Reid might continue to be part of it in ways neither of them had anticipated when she'd first driven into his failing garage on that fateful night. 6 months after the official launch, Hawkins Auto Repair had settled into a new normal that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. The combination of traditional services and electric vehicle specialization had attracted customers from throughout the region, necessitating the hiring of 2 additional employees. The garage now served as a training hub for mechanics from neighboring communities, with Michael himself conducting weekly workshops on the integration of traditional and electric vehicle technologies. Cedar Springs itself had begun showing signs of economic revival. The increased traffic to the garage had benefited other local businesses, from Ted's Diner to the previously struggling motel. 2 new restaurants had opened on Main Street, and the town council was discussing infrastructure improvements to accommodate the growing interest in electric vehicle tourism. On a crisp autumn morning, Michael arrived at the garage earlier than usual, enjoying the quiet moment before his team arrived. The space still gave him a sense of pride each time he entered, the perfect blend of traditional craftsmanship and cutting-edge technology, exactly as Alexis had envisioned. Thinking of Alexis brought a familiar mix of emotions. Since the launch, their contact had become less frequent, limited mostly to weekly video calls to discuss the regional hub program and occasional visits when she was passing through the area. She had been true to her word about expanding the initiative, with 11 new locations now in various stages of development across the country. The success should have been entirely satisfying, yet Michael found himself missing the more frequent interactions of the early implementation phase. There had been something uniquely energizing about working closely with someone who matched his own dedication to quality and service, who understood both where he came from and where he was going. The sound of tires on gravel pulled him from his thoughts. Glancing at the clock, he noted it was still 30 minutes before the garage officially opened. Through the window, he caught sight of a familiar gray van pulling into the lot. Alexis stepped out, dressed more casually than her usual business attire in jeans and a light sweater. She carried a small bag in one hand and what appeared to be a folder in the other. Her expression as she approached the door was difficult to read, purposeful, but with an underlying nervousness that seemed out of character. Michael opened the door before she could knock. "Midnight repair service now extends to morning hours," he quipped. "Though your van seems to be running fine." "The van is perfect," Alexis confirmed with a small smile. "But I have another repair need that might require your expertise." She held up the bag, which Michael now noticed contained a vintage carburetor, tarnished with age and clearly non-functional. "This was my grandfather's," she explained, setting it carefully on the nearest workbench. "From his 1957 Chevy. It's been sitting in a storage unit for years, along with a few other parts he saved before the car was sold. I wondered if it could be restored. Not necessarily to working condition, but enough to display properly. Or..." Michael examined the carburetor with gentle hands, recognizing it as a Rochester 4GC, a beautiful piece of engineering for its time. "It's pretty far gone," he assessed honestly. "But not beyond saving. It would take time, specialized cleaning processes, maybe some fabrication for the missing pieces. Is that something you'd be willing to take on?" Alexis asked, an unusual hesitancy in her voice. "I know you're busy with the expansion and training programs." "For this?" Michael smiled. "Absolutely. This is exactly the kind of work I love." He looked up from the part, studied her expression. "But I suspect you didn't drive all the way out here just to drop off your grandfather's carburetor." Alexis took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders in a gesture he'd come to recognize as her preparation for addressing something important. "No," she acknowledged. "I didn't." She placed the folder on the workbench next to the carburetor. "The board met yesterday to review the first year of the Revival Initiative. The results have exceeded all projections, both financially and in terms of community impact." "That's good news," Michael replied, sensing there was more. "It is," Alexis agreed. "So good, in fact, that they've approved an aggressive expansion, 50 new locations over the next 3 years, with Cedar Springs serving as the primary training and development hub." Michael raised an eyebrow. "That's substantial. You'll be spending even more time on the road than you already are." "Actually, no. That's the other part of their decision." Alexis opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be architectural plans. "They've authorized the establishment of a permanent Revival Initiative headquarters, a facility that would combine training, research and development, and program administration." She spread the plans across the workbench, detailed renderings of a modern facility with multiple buildings centered around what looked like a fully equipped garage space. "We've been evaluating potential locations based on a matrix of factors: central positioning relative to existing and planned partner sites, available workforce, community support, infrastructure, requirements." She paused, meeting his gaze directly. "Cedar Springs ranks highest across all metrics." Michael stared at the plans, the implications slowly registering. "You want to build this here? In Cedar Springs?" Alexis nodded. "On the old manufacturing plant property, we've already had preliminary discussions with the property owners and town council. The facility would create approximately 65 full-time positions, not counting the additional economic activity it would generate for the community." The scale of what she was proposing was momentarily overwhelming. The shuttered manufacturing plant had been Cedar Springs' open wound for years, a constant reminder of economic decline. To transform that symbol of loss into something vibrant and future-oriented would be nothing short of revolutionary for the town. "That's incredible," Michael managed. "The impact on Cedar Springs would be transformative." "Yes," Alexis agreed. "But there's one more component to the proposal." She drew a deep breath. "We want you to serve as Director of Traditional Craftsmanship for the entire initiative, overseeing that aspect of the program nationwide, while based at the new headquarters." Michael stared at her, certain he had misheard. "You want me to what?" "No one understands both the technical and philosophical foundations of the program better than you do," Alexis explained. "You've already proven your effectiveness as a trainer and mentor. The mechanics at our other locations respect you because you speak their language while also embracing the new technology," she continued before he could respond. "You wouldn't be giving up Hawkins Auto Repair. In fact, it would expand, becoming the working demonstration facility within the larger complex. But your role would evolve to include shaping the traditional craftsmanship components of the entire program." End quote. Michael looked from the plans to Alexis and back again, struggling to process the magnitude of what she was offering. It represented an opportunity he'd never imagined possible to take the knowledge and values he'd inherited from his father and elevate them to national significance. "I need some time to think about this," he said honestly. "Of course," Alexis replied immediately. "The board doesn't need an answer until next month. The plans are yours to review in the meantime." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "There's one more factor to consider, though it's entirely separate from the professional aspects of the proposal." "What's that?" Michael asked, noting the subtle shift in her demeanor. "If headquarters were established here, I'd be relocating to Cedar Springs permanently." She spoke the words carefully, her expression revealing more vulnerability than he'd ever seen from her. "That's a personal preference, not a business requirement." The board suggested several options, including remaining based in California with regular travel. I chose Cedar Springs. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Their connection had grown beyond professional collaboration, evolving into something neither had anticipated when a broken-down van had first brought them together. Before Michael could respond, the sound of cars pulling into the lot signaled the arrival of his team for the day's work. The moment of personal revelation was interrupted, shifting back to the safer territory of business discussion. "Think it over," Alexis said, gathering herself. "The carburetor isn't time-sensitive, but I'd appreciate updates on your progress when you have them." "I will," Michael promised, suddenly reluctant to see her leave. "Are you staying in town for a few days?" "Through the weekend," she confirmed. "I have meetings with the town council tomorrow, but I'm free for dinner tonight, if you'd like to discuss this further." "Ted's at 7, he suggested. Alexis smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her features. "Perfect. And Michael? Whatever you decide about the position, the carburetor means a lot to me. It's one of the few tangible connections I have to my grandfather. Thank you for being willing to restore it." As she left to greet the arriving employees, Michael remained by the workbench, looking from the vintage carburetor to the futuristic facility plans. In many ways, they represented the journey he'd been on since that midnight repair, bridging past and future, honoring tradition while embracing innovation. And perhaps, he thought, as he watched Alexis through the window, that journey might now include something neither of them had been looking for, but both had found nonetheless. 6 months later, Michael stood at the edge of the construction site, watching as crews prepared the foundation for what would become the Revival Initiative headquarters. The old manufacturing plant had been carefully demolished, its materials sorted for recycling and repurposing in accordance with Volta's environmental standards. Beside him, Alexis reviewed progress notes with the project manager, her attention to detail evident in every question she asked. Since relocating to Cedar Springs 3 months earlier, she had thrown herself into overseeing the development personally, renting a small house not far from the site. The town had embraced the project with enthusiasm once the scale of potential benefits became clear. Property values had already begun rising in anticipation of new jobs, and several vacant downtown storefronts now bore "opening soon" signs as entrepreneurs positioned themselves to serve the expected, quote, influx of workers and visitors. The expanded Hawkins Auto Repair was operating at full capacity, with Michael dividing his time between traditional repairs, electric vehicle services, and developing the nationwide training curriculum for his new role. The transition had been challenging but deeply satisfying. A perfect balance of hands-on work and broader impact. As the site visit concluded and the project manager departed, Alexis joined Michael at the observation point, overlooking what would eventually become the main training facility. "Hard to believe this was an abandoned factory 6 months ago," she commented, surveying the organized activity below. "Hard to believe any of this was possible 6 months ago," Michael replied. "Sometimes, I still expect to wake up back in the old garage, staring at those final notice stamps." Alexis smiled, slipping her hand into his with the easy familiarity that had developed between them. What had begun as professional respect had evolved gradually into friendship, and then, more recently, into something deeper. Their relationship had progressed naturally, neither rushing nor fighting the obvious connection. Weekly dinners to discuss the project had extended into long conversations about their backgrounds, values, and visions for the future. Shared challenges during the early construction phases had solidified their partnership beyond business matters. "Speaking of the old garage," Alexis said, "I have something for you back at the house. Are you free this evening?" "For you?" "Always," Michael replied, meaning it more completely than he could have imagined possible when they first met. That evening, Michael arrived at Alexis's rented cottage to find her waiting on the porch, a large object covered by a cloth beside her. Her expression was a mix of excitement and nervousness, unusual for someone typically so composed. "Close your eyes," she instructed as he approached. Michael complied with an amused smile. He heard her move the covered object, positioning it carefully. "Okay, open them." Before him stood a meticulously crafted display case containing his father's original tools, the ones that had been exhibited in the renovated garage, now arranged alongside the beautifully restored carburetor he had spent weeks carefully bringing back to its former glory. The custom-built wood cabinet featured an engraved plaque that read, "Bridging Generations, the Heritage of Craftsmanship." "This is for the lobby of the new headquarters," Alexis explained. "Every person who comes through those doors will see the foundations that make the Revival Initiative possible, the tools that build communities like Cedar Springs, and the skill that keeps them strong." Michael stared at the display, emotion tightening his throat. It was a perfect embodiment of everything they had worked to achieve, honoring the past while building toward the future. "It's perfect," he managed finally. "Dad would have been proud." "There's something else," Alexis said, her voice softer. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small box. "This isn't related to the project or the company. This is just us." She opened the box to reveal a set of keys. "My lease is up next month. I've been thinking that instead of renewing or finding another rental, maybe it's time for something more permanent, something we could make our own." Michael looked from the keys to her face, understanding the question she was really asking. "Are you proposing we move in together?" he asked, a smile spreading across his features. "I'm proposing we build a life together," Alexis replied, her characteristic directness softened by evident emotion. "Starting with a home, then seeing where the journey takes us." Michael took the keys, then drew her into an embrace. "I thought CEOs were supposed to present detailed 5-year plans for major initiatives," he teased gently. Alexis laughed against his shoulder. "Some journeys are better navigated one step at a time. I've learned that from you." As they stood together on the porch, the display case beside them symbolizing all they had accomplished and all that remained possible, Michael reflected on the remarkable chain of events that had brought them to this moment. A midnight repair that had seemed insignificant at the time had sparked a transformation not just for a struggling garage, but for an entire community, and for two people who had found in each other the perfect complement to their individual strengths. "Yes," he said simply. "Let's build that life together." In the distance, the sun set over the construction site of the Revival Initiative headquarters, casting a golden glow over Cedar Springs, a town no longer defined by what it had lost, but by what it was creating. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new paths forward, but for tonight, they would simply celebrate how far they had already come. From a struggling mechanic and a visionary CEO, To partners in every sense, their story had only just begun. The revival of Hawkins Auto Repair was merely the first chapter in a larger narrative about bridging divides, honoring tradition while embracing change, and finding unexpected connections that transform Berkreed. Individual journeys into shared adventures. As darkness fell over Cedar Springs, lights appeared in windows throughout townhomes, and businesses alike, glowing with renewed hope and purpose. The glow reached all the way to where Michael and Alexis stood, illuminating the path forward they would walk together, step by careful step, building a bridge between their once separate worlds into something stronger than either could have created alone.